I'm delighted that Congress was able to avoid a painful and unnecessary shutdown. I'm also pleased that programs for working families and, excuse me, I'm also pleased that programs working families need were not cut and that there was a good increase in funds for disaster relief, which will help Vermonters rebuild from July's terrible flooding. Oh, but he don't stop there. He don't stop there. And if it was just that, I'd be like, okay. But this is where it gets funny. I look forward to seeing Congress provide in the very near future financial support for Ukraine, which is valiantly struggling against Russian aggression. Oh boy. Oh boy. Oh boy. Yeah. That's what he said. I look forward to seeing Congress provide in the very near future financial support for Ukraine, which is valiantly struggling against Russian aggression. Somebody said to me once, Niko, I know that you don't like Bernie anymore, but like things would be so much better if Bernie was president. I said, you are mistaken. You are still relying on words and, to be quite honest, propaganda. And they're like, what do you mean propaganda? I'm like, Bernie put out a lot of propaganda, but he didn't have a lot of Senate bills introduced to support, to prove his fervor in supporting these issues that he talks about, right? One of the things that attracted me to Tulsi's campaign over Bernie's campaign was because I had one was in the Senate, one was in the House. I actually had a comparison to see who was going to stand on their word, who put the effort and the labor power behind the topics or the subjects or the policies that they advocate for. Bernie, almost never. Tulsi had a bill for literally almost every single thing that she had talked about on her the policy portion of her website. And the one thing that she didn't have a policy for was because initially she supported Bernie's bill, but then it got universal health care. And then it got reconstructed and basically just became a reformation of the Social Security Act that was not going to solve the problems. And that's when she decided to introduce her own bill, even for that. So Bernie never showed the conviction that people thought. Where he did show conviction, however, was, if I'm not mistaken, getting the war in Afghanistan wrong. In fact, at the time, I think it was only Barbara Lee who got the war in Afghanistan right. Although Bernie, people always thought that Bernie got Afghanistan right. But he never got it right. He didn't get it right until everybody else figured it out. Bernie supported the bombing of Kosovo. I wish I could find the video of people scolding him in Vermont for supporting the bombing of Kosovo. Bernie be waffling on Israel and Palestine. Bernie engaged in Russiagate. Ugh. To cringeworthy levels. Right? Bernie will sit there and call Maduro a dictator. Say that Assad is bombing his own, but this is who he's been. I'm scared to see what Bernie said about, you know what? Fuck it. We're gonna see what Bernie said about not Mossadegh, my apologies, about Muammar Gaddafi, just randomly. So, because people, like I said, somebody gonna tell me, oh yeah, Bernie would have been a great president. You know, it would have been different. No, I think it could have potentially been worse. I think that some of you all remember this if you were paying attention in 2016. Says, this was in Time. Bernie Sanders often attacks Hillary Clinton for being in favor of overthrowing dictators around the world, but at the Democratic debate Saturday night, she took a swipe back at him on the issue, speaking about overthrowing the government of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya in 2011 and ensuing chaos. Former Secretary of State Clinton said, "There's always retrospective to say what mistakes were made, but I know that we offered a lot of help, and I know it was difficult for the Libyans to accept the help." That actually doesn't really make sense, but whatever. Vermont Senator Sanders then recited to Clinton his usual attacks against regime change. The truth is, it is relatively easy for a powerful nation like America to overthrow a dictator, he said, but it is very hard to predict the unintended consequences and the turmoil and in the instability that follows after you overthrow that dictator. I'm not quite a fan of regime change as she is, which is not necessarily true, but Clinton invoked Sanders' record in the Senate to paint him as a hypocrite on the issue. And you know it's bad when Hillary Clinton gets to paint you as a hypocrite. She said, "I think it's only fair to put on the record Senator Sanders voted in the Senate for a resolution calling for the ending of the Gaddafi regime and asking the UN to be brought in." So the moral of the story, this is who Bernie Sanders is. This is who he was. When I read his tweets yesterday or the day before, what was it, 2 days ago? September 30th. So 2 days ago, yeah. When I read his tweets, I wasn't surprised. I was like, yeah, of course he said this. This is who he is. I was telling people this. Remember in 2020 or in 2019, I was like, y'all, I had entire debates where people were trying to claim that Tulsi was more pro-war, even though she wasn't, and burnt in it because they were basically saying by contrast, right? Comparison contrast, Tulsi was more pro-war. And I'm just like, people got mad at me for literally just explaining things like this. I'm like, he voted to overthrow Gaddafi. And there was actually a tweet at the time of Tulsi saying, like, no, we shouldn't do it. And she wasn't even in Congress yet. I don't think she was even in Congress yet, not at the federal level. So, like, what did Jimmy said this the other day? People get mad at the messenger whenever, like, you're trying to warn people. And mind you, I wasn't saying like, okay, Bernie's a horrible person. I'm saying he has a shoddy record on war. Like, sometimes he's okay with it, sometimes he's not. One time, like, sometimes he'll say he's not okay with it and then vote in the opposite direction. In other words, he's a Democrat, right? In other words, he's a Democrat with the I by his name. Independent senator from Vermont, my ass. They don't be telling y'all. Independent senator from Vermont is a technicality because technically they don't have political parties to register for in Vermont, so he can get away with that. But Bernie is a coward, yo. He is just the biggest letdown that was. Y'all want to talk about political awakening? Yeah, his campaign in 2016 was like the inception of my like huge political awakening, like the next jump in my personal political awakening and activism. However, the way he failed us woke me up even more because I was able to then like put my ego, put my hurt feelings and all that good stuff to the side, retroactively go back and look like, no, there were signs. This was a sign. This was a sign. I'm not talking about signs even from 2016, 2017, 28. I'm like, no, there were signs in 1990. There were signs into early 2000s. Those videos were out there and I did not hunt them down because I wanted Bernie to be somebody else. I wanted him to be who he said he was. I wanted him to be who everybody else said he was. And like a lot of you all, I didn't, because you saw what happened whenever you literally mildly criticized Bernie in 2020. What happened? You're attacked immediately. Offering a criticism, like, hey, man, like, this happened. Like, does somebody want to address this? Why would you say that? He's our only chance. You got a better option? Like, I didn't say that. What? That's not even what we're talking about. But that's what happened. But I was able to go back and retroactively look at, like, oh no, Bernie's always been a coward. One can make an argument that his career in activism was a direct attempt to find a clique and find an avenue to further his own agenda, because he didn't have anything. Like his family had moved away. Remember, his parents had passed, unfortunately, before he went to college. His brother moved to Europe. He was in Chicago basically by himself. How do you make friends in that time period as a Jewish kid from Brooklyn? Oh, you get into the civil rights movement. Well, I get a lot of attention from being the one lone white guy, or one of the 2 or 3 lone white guys who are standing up for these black people. Maybe I can make a career out of it, even though I didn't decide to move to Vermont where there's only white people. But one can make an argument that that whole thing was just it was self-righteousness with an agenda to be seen as a savior, or as someone called it, a white savior. And it's reality. The way he threw Breonna Joy Gray under the bus after the election, the way he, I don't even think he came to endorse Nina at the time. The way he threw Tulsi under the bus. Like, there was a pattern of black activists within Bernie's campaign, black literally staffers getting thrown under the bus, like, to protect Bernie's ego. So when people were warning about this, we were attacked. His record when it comes to anything in Africa is shoddy. Anything in Central and South America is shoddy. When he talked about socialism, for example, he talked about democratic socialism. What countries would he always use? He would say, I would get so furious. I'm not talking about that bad communism in Venezuela. I'm talking about that great socialism in Scandinavia. So the socialism that doesn't get sanctioned into oblivion and have all their resources stolen. You mean that kind of socialism? Like, yeah, it's easier to be a socialist country whenever you're not getting destroyed for being a socialist nation. So white socialism, great. Brown and black socialism, bad. Like, he would say stuff like that. That was letting us know who he was back then. Right? Like, am I crazy? Tell me if I'm crazy. If I'm crazy, let me know. And I'm very happy that people now call him out. I'm very, like, even his own, like, people who used to, like, work for him call him out. But I said back then, we have to call him out. If you want to hold somebody accountable, you do it while they're in pursuit of power. You don't do it once they fucking arrive. They need to have the threat of not achieving their goal in their mind. Nick from Socialist MMA on Twitter, Nick on RBN a while ago, he said, why would I give up my leverage by just blindly supporting a candidate? Like, because he learned from his experience from Bernie in 2020. He said, why would I give up my leverage by blindly supporting a candidate, defending everything they do? Because now they know that just to protect, and people do this, right? It's human nature. No one wants to look like they made the wrong decision, right? So what do? No matter what that candidate does, they do not criticize them legitimately. I'm not saying you got to hate the person. Like, that's just emotionally immature. But to protect the ego, because you want to not only do you want your candidate to win, perhaps because you actually do believe in their policies, but you want them to win because you want to win. You see their success as an extension of your good decision making, right? And you're great. Like, that's how humans work. Your ego gets wrapped up in the candidacy, and then you're going to support them, do whatever they say, support their mistakes regardless. So why would you give up leverage by letting them know, yeah, I could tell you, like I said, I believe in a lot of things that Cornel West talks about, believe in a lot of things that RFK talks about. I have problems with some of the stuff that RFK does, or really not that many, but the Israel-Palestine thing is the biggest issue. He also said something about the Soviet Union that was, like, technically false, but I let it slide because, like, most people don't know the truth. But with Cornel West, same thing. I have like, some people's biggest issue is Israel-Palestine. Like, that's a non-negotiable. And Normally, foreign policy wise, that is a non-negotiable for me for the most part, normally. But because of my personal experiences, the jab, that situation, the whole situation, like not just the jab itself, but I had family members die. My family was torn to pieces because of those policies. That is the non-negotiable issue for me. And it's for the same reason that a Palestinian finds their issue to be non-negotiable, because their lives are being destroyed. They have a right for that to be a non-negotiable issue. So my life, my family's life, I lost 2 family members because of that, and a third because they didn't have those 2 family members in their lives and they ended up down the wrong path and no one could help them. And so they end up being killed. So like that is a non-negotiable for me. And guess what? I'm not going to give anyone my endorsement until somebody starts squaring these circles. And you shouldn't either.